Jaron "Boots" Ennis is one of boxing's most promising and explosive talents, and now it looks like he could be stepping into one of the most unexpected yet intriguing matchups of the year. Promoter Hearn revealed that serious talks are underway for Ennis to take on Teofimo Lopez, and the fight could happen as soon as August in Saudi Arabia. This wasn't part of Ennis's original plan. He was expecting to return to action in September or even October. But the allure of a high-profile opponent like Lopez, combined with the prestige and money tied to a Saudi Arabia event, has changed everything. That kind of opportunity doesn't come around often, and when it does, you either grab it or watch it slip away. This fight is a bit of a curveball for Ennis. He's the current IBF and WBO welterweight champion, and his main focus, up until now, has been collecting all the belts at 147 pounds. Becoming undisputed has been the dream, and for good reason. Few accomplishments carry the same weight in boxing, but the road to unification is never simple. Politics, mandatory defenses, and promotional roadblocks often stall or completely derail those plans. In this case, Hearn suggested that getting a deal done with WBO champion Brian Norman Jr. might be more trouble than it's worth, especially without a serious financial push behind Ennis. That's where Lopez enters the picture, a big name, a fresh storyline, and a massive payday, even if it means putting the undisputed pursuit on ice for a little while longer. There's a specific date being floated around in August for the potential showdown, and while that's earlier than expected, the magnitude of the event might outweigh the inconvenience. Ennis has a mandatory challenger in Shakram Gyasov, a fighter who already stepped aside once to allow the Stanionis bout to happen. Hearn mentioned that there might be room for another conversation with Gyasov's camp, possibly persuading him to delay his title shot again. If that happens, it wouldn't be the first time, and probably not the last, that mandatory obligations get sidestepped in favor of the bigger box office draw. Still, there's a limit to how often you can delay a mandatory before fans and critics start questioning your motives. That brings up an uncomfortable question. Is Boots Ennis avoiding Gyasov? Twice now, the Uzbek fighter has been told to wait his turn, despite earning his shot. Gyasov is considered a dangerous threat, a technically sharp, physically strong, and mentally tough opponent. Avoiding him once could be chalked up to timing or strategy, but twice? That starts to look like evasion. If Ennis truly believes he's the best at 147, he's going to have to prove it by taking on all comers, not just the ones with name value or the easier path to glory. Boxing fans remember, and so do historians, if Ennis becomes undisputed without ever facing the toughest guys in line, there will always be an asterisk hanging over that accomplishment. Some critics have even questioned how ready Ennis really is. If the only thing keeping him from taking the fight with Lopez is the date being a month or two earlier than planned, what does that say about his confidence and conditioning? The greats of the sport were always ready when big fights called. Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, and Floyd Mayweather never blinked when the spotlight hit them early. If Ennis wants to be mentioned in those kinds of conversations, he's got to show that same readiness and hunger, even if the date catches him a little off guard. This is the hurt business. You don't always get to choose the timing. From a physical standpoint, though, this potential matchup heavily favors Ennis. Hearn didn't mince words when he talked about the size difference between the two. Teofimo Lopez is talented, no question. He's explosive, he's got guts, and he's proven himself by beating the likes of Vasily Lomachenko. But at his core, Lopez is a small 140-pounder. Even in his last fights, when he stepped on the scale, hours after hydrating, he barely cracked 146 pounds. Compare that to what Ennis will weigh on fight night, fully hydrated and fueled up, likely pushing close to 165 or even 170. That's a huge difference. And while skill matters, size matters too. At the elite level, when both guys are fast, smart, and trained to perfection, those physical advantages become game changers. In fact, this matchup could look like a junior middleweight taking on a blown-up lightweight. Ennis should probably already be fighting at 154 pounds, if we're being honest. He's big for 147, and draining down to that weight to take on naturally smaller opponents only highlights the talent gap. Teofimo may be brave enough to step, up, but courage doesn't close a 20-pound gap. That might make for an exciting pre-fight storyline, but once the bell rings, fans want to see a competitive battle, not a physical mismatch. And there's a real risk that this turns into the latter. The spectacle of the event might overshadow what actually takes place in the ring. And yet, this is boxing. Hype and headlines often trump logic. Lopez still has a name. He still has a fan base. And he brings drama with him every time he fights. Whether it's the emotional aftermath of his loss to George Kambosos or the razor-thin decisions he squeaked out against Sandor Martin and Jamaine Ortiz, Lopez's career is never short on twists. That's what sells tickets. But if we're being honest about his recent performances, they haven't exactly screamed dominance. He's talented but flawed. He's dangerous but vulnerable. Putting him in the ring with a bigger, faster, more polished Ennis could be a recipe for disaster. For Teofimo, that is. Interestingly, some fans still haven't forgotten that Ennis reportedly turned down a massive $8 million payday to fight Virgil Ortiz Jr. back in February. That fight was supposed to take place on the big Riyadh card. Instead, Ennis chose to fight Imantas Stanionis for significantly less. That decision left a lot of people scratching their heads. Ortiz is one of the most exciting, heavy-handed young fighters in the sport. Beating him would have added serious weight to Ennis's resume. So why pass that up? Was it the money? Was it fear of getting tested at 154 pounds? Whatever the reason, that move gave critics fuel, and they haven't stopped throwing it on the fire since. Hearn tried to justify that decision, but at some point, even he has to acknowledge what it looked like. If Boots Ennis truly believes he's ready to dominate 154 or even 160 in the future, why not take the Ortiz fight? Why not cash in and send a statement to the world? Instead, fans were left with the impression that Ennis isn't quite as confident as he wants us to believe. His performance last year against Jaron in Philadelphia didn't help either. That fight was supposed to be a showcase. Instead, it raised more questions than answers. Maybe Ennis is still figuring things out. Maybe the leap to superstardom is proving more complicated than expected. At the end of the day, the potential matchup with Teofimo Lopez is both fascinating and frustrating. Fascinating because it brings two high-profile fighters from different weight classes together on a massive stage in Saudi Arabia. Frustrating because the size mismatch could make it less competitive than fans hope. If it happens, the event will still draw eyeballs. The spectacle will be undeniable. But if Boots Ennis walks through a much smaller man and avoids his mandatory again, it'll only deepen the criticism about how he's navigating his career. For Ennis, this is a crucial stretch. He's talented, no one questions that. But talent alone doesn't carve out greatness. Decisions do. The opponents you choose, the risks you take, and the moments you seize all define your legacy. If he wants to be remembered alongside the greats, Boots has to start checking those boxes without cutting corners and without hiding behind matchmaking. Whether that starts with Teofimo Lopez or with finally facing a guy like Gyasov or Ortiz Jr., that choice will say everything. And boxing fans, they'll be watching every step. The pressure is building on Ennis not just because of his talent, but because of the growing spotlight. He's no longer a hidden gem or a well-kept secret. In the boxing world, he's a target, a name, a brand in the making. With that comes expectations, and the whispers of doubt have already started to circle. Every decision he makes now is magnified. Every fight he takes or avoids shapes how fans and critics view him. If he keeps sidestepping the names that would truly test his greatness, no amount of flashy knockouts or title belts will erase the feeling that he's ducking the hard road. And that road is exactly what separates the good from the legendary. Teofimo Lopez, for all his bravado and contradictions, represents a dangerous kind of bait. He's a name that carries clout, but also risk. If Ennis demolishes him, as many expect, it could backfire in terms of respect. Fans don't give you full credit for beating a smaller man, even if that man used to be undisputed at lightweight. And if, by some twist, Lopez rises to the occasion and pulls off a shocking upset, then Ennis's credibility takes a massive hit. That's the gamble. It's a high-reward, high-risk fight, but not in the traditional sense. The reward is media attention, a check with a lot of zeros, and a global stage. The risk is being labeled a bully or, worse, being exposed. There's also the looming reality that the welterweight division won't wait forever. Other rising contenders are coming. Younger, hungrier fighters with less to lose and everything to gain are gunning for a shot.